Hi everyone, I'm making a series of introductory NGSS presentations for the school board. So as I do each one, I'll put them up here at this site for teachers who want to learn more about the NGSS. The first one is about the origins of the NGSS and our implementation plans. In this presentation, I'm going to explain why the Next Generation Science Standards were created, and show you California's implementation timeline, and then describe a little bit about what the district's doing to implement the NGSS. The NGSS were developed first from a framework for K-12 science education. This framework describing what K-12 science education should be like was made by the National Research Council. And as you can see, they had a pretty illustrious set of people helping them with it. Notice that it's not just science, life science, physical science, earth science, and engineers that are part of this, but also cognitive scientists and people who research science education and standards. They all came together to look at what would be the best way to teach K-12 science based on the current research we have about cognition, about science, about learning. They created a framework to describe all this based in these principles, that children are in fact born investigators. They're curious and they want to learn, and science can make use of that. That we have to put both core ideas and scientific practices at the center of science learning. And that learning will develop over time, so that these ideas and concepts must be visited and revisited from K to 12. They also said that science and engineering practices would require knowledge and practice, not just the content of science. And finally, that we have to take science learning and connect it to what students are interested in and what their past experiences are. And in that way, we would connect students to science in a way that promoted equity, that is, science for all students. The makers of, or the framers or the writers of the NGSS framework said that science, engineering, and technology permeate nearly every facet of modern life. And they also hold the key to meeting many of humanity's most pressing current and future challenges. But they saw that as a problem, because too few people are graduating from school with any knowledge of these science, engineering, and technological ideas, and would be unable to be part of an economy that was based on them. Here's the example for California. We actually need STEM graduates, and for those of you who don't know, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. California needs, by 2018, over 1 million people ready to work in STEM, which is an increase in our job growth of about 19%. But we have a very leaky STEM pipeline. We start with 9th graders, about 500,000 enrolled in 2001. But of those, only 70% would graduate high school. Here's that 70%. Of that 70%, only 53% would graduate college ready. Here's that 53%. They go on to college, but of them, only 21% of them are ready to major in science, technology, engineering, or math. And then, only 21,000 of them will ultimately graduate with a STEM degree. That's not going to be enough. As you saw, we need more than 1 million people in this state ready to work in the STEM industries. So the makers of the framework decided to state their goal like this: to ensure that by the end of the 12th grade, all students have some appreciation of the beauty and wonder of science, possess sufficient knowledge of science and engineering to engage in public discussion on related issues, are careful consumers of science and technological information related to their everyday lives, are able to continue to learn about science outside school, and have the skills to enter careers of their choice, including but not limited to careers in science, engineering, and technology. So even though we're concerned about STEM careers, we're not preparing all kids for STEM careers. What we're doing is making all kids feel like science and technology are engaging and that they can enter into those ideas and, if they wanted to, pursue a career in it. But most importantly, they're just good citizens with a civic competence to be part of public discussions and careful consumers of science and technological information. The vision overall for education in the sciences and in engineering is one in which students will engage in scientific and engineering practices using cross-cutting concepts to deepen their understanding of core ideas. Now, those three things are highlighted here because they're going to come back in the next the next PowerPoint presentation I put up, in which I talk about the pieces of the NGSS standards themselves, their architecture. And those three pieces will be coming back to visit. We'll be coming back to visit them again. So this framework was made by this set of specialists, and based on that framework, 26 lead partner states and Achieve, a group that was hired by the Governors Association to work on this effort, led in the development of the K-12 Next Generation Science Standards. They're based on the framework, the science, the latest science in life, physical, earth, and in engineering, as well as cognitive science. And once the standards were written, they were reviewed by stakeholders, open to the public, but also to science specialists like the National Research Council, the National Science Teachers Association, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Ultimately, the NGSS are not a list of science content, but rather performance expectations. And the next presentation I give will show you that. These performance expectations tell the key scientific ideas and practices that a student should be able to perform. And these are for performances from kindergarten students all the way up through high school students. Note that the NGSS are not curriculum. They are performance expectations. But how students reach those performance expectations are still left up to teachers' creativity and expertise. Now, California has a timeline for how to implement the Common Core. We're in year 2 right now of the awareness phase. And as you can see, there's lots of parts here to the awareness phase, but the number one piece was to introduce the NGSS to science teacher leaders. We're looking for science teachers interested in learning more about being good science teachers and using the NGSS. So there have been many meetings up and down the state, for example, these rollouts at the county offices, but there's also been workshops, online webinars, even some staff development within the schools. And here in TUSD, we've hired the San Joaquin County Office of Ed the last 2 years to work with science specialists, grades 7 and up, to focus them on looking at the NGSS. This is what an NGSS page in the standards looks like. And I'm choosing this one on purpose because it's real scary looking. There are a lot of details. It looks like no other standard you've ever seen. There's lots of color coding. None of this seems to make sense when people first see it. I'll be honest, I almost cried when I first saw it. I thought there's no way I'll ever be able to figure out what this means. But in fact, it's actually kind of easy. And again, in my next presentation, I'll show you how that works. In the second part of California's implementation timeline, starting in the new upcoming school year 2015, but going through 2018, we're in the transition phase. This is where the state has to complete a lot of its responsibilities, finishing the new science framework and getting it adopted, getting some recommendations on how to create science assessments, and putting out a list of instructional materials aligned to the NGSS, which right now don't even exist. At the same time, school districts like Tracy have to build the capacity of their teachers with staff development and try to build their capacity by making networks. We're already in this because we have an NGSS K-8 Early Implementation Grant. 2014-15 was the first year of the grant, and we hope to be in it for 3 more years if our work is still good. Here you can see a teacher on the left working on some information about science that she's working on creating a lesson. This is part of what's called a conceptual flow, and then it gets translated into a 5E lesson plan. So long process, it's kind of complicated. If you look over to the right, you'll see closer to you in the foreground a teacher with her computer open to a kind of mapping program that is doing the same kind of conceptual flow work that the women are doing up on the flip chart. And the woman you see in the background on the right-hand side is our consultant who's providing us technical assistance for our K-8 teachers in the early implementation grant. So we're already involved in some of the work that should be starting next year in the transition phase. That is, having staff development, teachers working in this area, just a small group starting to try out the new ways of thinking about how to create NGSS aligned lessons, and working with a network, getting involved with this K-8 early implementation grant to bring us more knowledge and technical assistance. There's a final step, and that is the actual implementation phase. I'm going to say this really clearly and carefully, that the implementation phase begins in 2016. That does not mean we will have full implementation in 2016. It means we will begin. It will be the first year of implementation. The state and the district expect that implementation to be complete will take several years. During the implementation phase, we'll be expanding our professional development opportunities to all teachers, aligning our curriculum, instruction, and assessments, perhaps doing some rigorous curriculum design type process with the science standards, and the state will be piloting the new NGSS assessment and then field testing it and then making an operational assessment. But that'll take some time. Here's an example of some of the work people in the K-12, the K-8 and the 9-12 science committees are doing. If you look in the center, we're looking at ways that our CCSS experience influences our NGSS efforts. If you look on the far right, we're looking at what's best for kids in terms of the middle school implementation. If you look over on the left, you'll see that we're addressing the community. How can we bring the community more into this, and how can we do more communication with our community partners and parents about what's happening in the NGSS? So I hope you've seen some of the basics about how the NGSS got made, what the state expects to be the timeline, and what we're starting to do here in Tracy Unified to get teachers on board and feeling prepared with the NGSS. We're only at the very beginning of what's going to be a long process, but one that I think we're doing pretty well with, in that we have made good connections with the San Joaquin County Office of Ed and with the K-8 Science Grant to help us develop our capacity, develop teachers' capacity to teach to these standards. The next board meeting, I'll be presenting to them on the next generation science standards and how they're different, how they look different, how they're constructed different, how they have different expectations than the 1998 California science standards that we're currently using. And when I'm done with that, I'll upload it here, and I welcome you to come back and hear some more.